When the invitation came, it wasn't flowers or perfume that filled the envelope. It was tension, the kind that wraps around your chest and whispers, "You already know." It was from my husband's company, embossed in gold, addressed to both of us. Formal dinner, partners welcome. I stared at it for a long time, my coffee turning cold beside me. It wasn't the event that hurt. It was the tone in his voice when he mentioned it, as if I were being included out of obligation, not love. For months, I'd felt the shift, the late nights, the guarded phone calls, the new cologne that wasn't meant for me. But I kept pretending not to notice, pretending that silence could keep a marriage alive, that if I ignored the cracks, maybe the whole thing wouldn't shatter. But deep down, I knew this dinner wasn't just business. It was confirmation, and maybe my final test. I walked into my closet and stared at the dresses that once made him smile. Every color had a memory. The navy one from our anniversary, the cream silk he used to say made me glow. But none of them felt right anymore. They weren't me, not the woman who'd been sitting alone at dinner tables, waiting for footsteps that never came. My reflection looked tired, but not weak. There was something new in my eyes, quiet strength, the kind you earn when love turns into endurance. I didn't dress to impress that night. I dressed to end the illusion. I chose a simple black gown, elegant but unassuming. I didn't wear diamonds. I wore resolve. As I zipped it up, I remembered my mother's words. When people show you where they stand, don't argue. Just rise, I called the driver and told him to be ready at 8. My hands shook a little as I clasped my earrings. Not from fear, but from finality. I wasn't going there to fight for my place. I was going to see if there was one left. And as I stepped out into the night, the air felt heavy, almost prophetic. Something told me that by the time I came home, I wouldn't be the same woman anymore. I'd either break or I'd begin again. The moment I stepped into that hotel, I could feel the air change, thick with perfume, money, and lies. The Grand Meridian sparkled under crystal chandeliers, but beneath all that shine, I could sense the rot. People turned to look, not out of admiration, but curiosity. I wasn't the kind of woman who caused whispers anymore. I was the one they pitied in silence. I found my name on a card near the end of the long table. My husband was already seated, surrounded by laughter that didn't include me. He glanced up for half a second. No warmth, no recognition, just polite distance. And beside him sat her, the woman everyone had been talking about. She was radiant in a red satin gown, the kind of bold that demands attention. She laughed too loud, touched his arm too often, and looked at me the way one might look at an outdated painting. Pretty once, but no longer relevant. I sat quietly, every nerve awake. The clinking glasses, the soft jazz, the murmurs. Everything felt staged. Then came her moment. She stood, spinning slightly as if showing off her dress. "Oh, this old thing," she said, her tone drenched in false modesty. "He helped me pick it out." Her hand brushed his shoulder. The table erupted in applause and teasing. My husband laughed too, a sound that stung like betrayal disguised as charm. Someone across the table leaned in and whispered, "You must be the wife." The word wife landed like a challenge, not a title. I smiled politely. "Yes," I said softly, "the wife." And though I kept my voice calm, my pulse was roaring in my ears. The mistress turned toward me, eyes glinting. "It's lovely to finally meet you," she said sweetly. "You're even more graceful than I imagined." The kind of compliment that drips poison beneath the sugar. Every instinct told me to leave, to walk out and never look back. But I stayed, not because I wanted to, but because dignity sometimes means holding still while the storm passes. I lifted my glass not to toast them, but to steady my hand. That night, under all those lights, I learned something powerful. Silence can cut deeper than anger. And though I didn't say a word, everyone at that table felt it. A quiet promise that this humiliation would not be my ending. It would be my awakening. When I finally stood up from that dinner table, my chair made the softest sound. But in that moment, it felt like thunder. Every eye turned toward me. Some were curious, others amused, and a few, mostly women, looked almost sorry. I didn't say a word. I simply placed my napkin on the table, straightened my posture, and gave a faint smile that held back everything I wanted to scream. My husband barely glanced up. The mistress did, though, her lips curling into a smug smirk like she'd won some kind of prize. But she hadn't. Not yet. As I walked out of the Grand Meridian, the night air hit my skin like freedom wrapped in frost. I'd been suffocating inside that hall, drowning in whispers, and yet the moment those doors closed behind me, I could breathe again. The valet approached me hesitantly, holding out his hand for my ticket. I handed it to him without a word. The murmurs from the doorway followed me out, laughter still echoing faintly behind the glass. Then came the sound, the low, commanding hum of an engine that didn't just arrive, it announced itself. Heads turned. The valet drove up a gleaming silver Rolls Royce, its polished surface reflecting the golden lights of the hotel. The car looked majestic, almost out of place among the fleet of luxury sedans parked nearby. The doorman's expression shifted first. Confusion, then realization. He stammered slightly. Mrs. Carter, this is yours? I nodded. It always has been. The whispers began again, but this time, they weren't about pity. They were about power. Cameras flashed, phones lifted, faces pressed against the glass doors inside the hotel. Even the mistress's laughter faded into silence. The same people who had smirked minutes earlier now stared, their curiosity bending into awe. What none of them knew was that this Rolls Royce wasn't just a car, it was a symbol, one my late father left for me, along with the legacy of Carter Holdings, the investment firm that had quietly financed half the projects my husband boasted about. I'd never flaunted it, never felt the need to. But tonight, the world remembered something my husband had conveniently forgotten. I was not a woman built from his shadow. I was born from my father's empire. As I settled into the back seat, the leather cool against my skin, I felt a calm I hadn't felt in months. The driver closed the door gently and looked at me through the mirror. "Home, ma'am?" he asked. I shook my head. "Take the long route." As the city lights blurred past, I let the silence sink in. Not the silence of shame, but of awakening. The kind that whispers, "You're done being small." By the time we pulled into the long driveway of my family's estate, I wasn't just the wife who'd been humiliated. I was the woman who remembered who she truly was. And that memory, that quiet, undeniable truth, was far more powerful than any revenge I could have spoken that night. The morning after that dinner, I woke up before the sun. The house was quiet, too quiet, the kind of stillness that makes you hear your own heartbeat. My husband hadn't come home, and for the first time, I didn't care where he was. The hurt had already burned through me. What remained was clarity. I made myself coffee, opened the window, and let the cold air wash over my face. Then I reached for the folder that had been sitting untouched on my desk for months, the one with my father's signature and my name printed boldly beside his. Inside were documents I'd ignored while trying to save a marriage that wasn't mine anymore. Shareholder agreements, merger contracts, and a letter my father wrote before he passed. I remembered his words clearly. "One day, they'll forget who you are, Emma. When that happens, remind them." That sentence echoed in my mind as I scanned through the numbers and percentages, each line sharpening my resolve. My husband didn't just forget who I was. He gambled everything thinking I wouldn't remember. But I did. And now, it was time to remind him. A week later, I walked into the company's headquarters. Tall glass walls, modern furniture, and egos that thought they owned the sky. Everyone froze for a second when they saw me. The same employees who'd laughed quietly behind my back now lowered their voices. The receptionist stammered a greeting. I smiled politely and walked straight to the boardroom. My heels echoed with purpose. When I entered, they were already there. My husband, the mistress in another designer dress, and the senior board members. He looked startled, then annoyed. "Emma," he said, trying to sound calm, "you shouldn't be here. This is a private meeting." "Actually," I replied, sliding the folder onto the polished table, "it's not." The chairman opened the documents, and within moments, the room shifted. The color drained from my husband's face. Line after line confirmed it. I now held 51% ownership of the merged company. His voice cracked as he spoke. This can't be right. Oh, it's very right, I interrupted softly. You should have read the fine print before you laughed at the wrong woman. The board voted swiftly. My husband was removed as managing partner effective immediately. The mistress, once radiant and confident, couldn't even meet my eyes. Her red lips trembled. The room was silent except for the clicking of pens signing the decision. When it was over, I gathered my papers calmly, turned toward the window, and said, I heard the dinner was lovely. I suppose this is dessert. As I walked out, the whispers followed. Not of pity this time, but respect. That day, I didn't just reclaim my place. I reclaimed my name, my power, and the truth that had been buried under someone else's arrogance. For the first time in a long time, I felt free. Not because I won, but because I remembered who I was meant to be all along. The headlines came first, bold, cruel, and unavoidable. CEO ousted by wife in shocking power shift. They made it sound like revenge, but that wasn't what it was. I wasn't out to destroy him. I just stopped protecting him. For years, I'd been his shield, smiling beside him, softening his rough edges, covering his mistakes with silence. But when the silence started costing me my peace, I decided to let the world see the truth for itself. He tried to call me, of course. At first, it was anger, then pleading, then silence again when he realized none of it mattered anymore. I'd spent too many nights crying over his betrayals, but now those tears had dried into resolve. There was no satisfaction in watching him fall, just a strange, bittersweet calm. My revenge wasn't loud. It was elegant, deliberate, and quiet. The mistress tried too, reaching out through friends, posting apologies that sounded more like self-promotion than remorse. I never meant to hurt anyone, she wrote on her social media, posing with tears perfectly framed. I didn't respond. The world had already begun to move on, and so had I. My focus shifted to something far more meaningful. The women like me, who had been laughed at, betrayed, and forgotten once the room stopped clapping for them. I founded a fund in my father's name, the Carter Women's Initiative, using my dividends from the company. Scholarships, small business grants, legal support for women abandoned after giving everything. I wanted to turn my pain into something that healed others. Every signature I wrote, every check I signed, felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. The board tried to lure me back into the spotlight, offering press interviews and leadership awards. But I declined. I didn't need applause. I needed peace. I spent my mornings walking through the gardens of my estate, drinking tea with women who were learning to rebuild their lives. Their stories reminded me that power isn't measured in titles or cars. It's in how gracefully you stand after being broken. A few months later, the same hotel where I'd been humiliated hosted a charity gala, mine. The hall shimmered again under chandeliers, but this time, the laughter was mine to share. As I stepped out of the silver Rolls Royce, wearing a flowing black silk gown, the cameras flashed once more. Not out of scandal this time, out of respect. The same reporters who once called me the forgotten wife now called me the woman who rewrote her story. Inside, I greeted familiar faces. Some avoided eye contact. Others smiled nervously. But I felt no bitterness. I'd already won in the only way that mattered, with dignity. That night, as the orchestra played softly and the room glowed in gold, I realized my revenge had never been about destruction. It was about creation. I didn't want to ruin his world. I wanted to build mine. And I had. Quietly. Completely. Unapologetically. That night, when I came home from the gala, I stood in front of my mirror. The same one I'd once avoided when I felt invisible. My reflection stared back at me. Not as the wife who was betrayed, but as the woman who survived it all with grace. The light from the chandelier above cast a soft glow over the room. And for the first time in years, I saw peace in my own eyes. I thought about the laughter, the whispers, the humiliation, and how every piece of it led me here. I'd spent so long trying to prove I was enough, but I finally understood. I always was. I just needed to stop shrinking to fit inside someone else's shadow. I ran my fingers across the vanity, smiling faintly. Never beg to sit at a table that was never built for you, I whispered to myself. Build your own. and let them ask for a seat. My phone buzzed with another apology I didn't open.